Stanislav Levchenko, a former major with the KGB and a lecturer and consultant on international affairs. What was your reaction to the resignation speech of President Mikhail Gorbachev?
If you permit, have two reactions. One reaction to his resignation and the other reaction to his short speech. The speech, honestly, I didn't like because it was very short, which is basically positive. Mr. Gorbachev did pay tribute to his own performance throughout the last 6 years. What irritated me, to be honest, is that he didn't mention the name of Yeltsin, the president of Russia, who takes the whole power in his hands, including the codes for the nuclear weapons. And in this country, for instance, when president is elected, sometimes contenders, not necessarily like each other, but they always pay certain respect, to other people who, were competing for the seat and things like that. It looks like Mr. Gorbachev is upset and probably very angry. Speaking about resignation, it is, of course, let's be serious. We are witnessing the history in the making. Mr. Gorbachev, let's be precise as we can, was resigning not because he did bad job or he is, doesn't fit to his position. He resigned because Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. And he was president of the Soviet Union. So and that is a historical importance because, first of all, it is the largest empire in the world that doesn't exist anymore. Secondly, Marxism, Leninism, communism is dead, and dead not only in the Soviet Union, but dead everywhere. There are still some communist parties in different countries, but they don't make much sense anymore, and they will fade away. Finally, the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the dissolution of Soviet Communist Party, which happened a few months ago, also means that at least Russia and some other former Soviet republics are becoming democracies. And let's not forget that Soviet Union is the country which during terrible Stalin times lost about 20 million lives. People were literally slaughtered in Gulag. So we are witnessing now history in the making, and I myself, to be honest, I'm really excited. I'm watching, C-SPAN, I'm watching CNN, whatever, I'm trying to get as much news as I can because every day brings something new.
Welcome to C-SPAN. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Stanislav Levchenko. We'll be discussing recent events in the Soviet Union, including the resignation of President Gorbachev. If you have a question or comment for our guest, our lines are open. The numbers are on your screen. I'd like to remind you that if you've called C-SPAN in the past 30 days, this is not the day for you to call. Welcome once again.
Yeah, thank you.
How will the Russian people and the people of all the Soviet republics remember Mr. Gorbachev?
At this point, majority of people are very angry at Mr. Gorbachev, and probably deservedly so, because Mr. Gorbachev was long overdue with his resignation, and at least at some point of his career, he was not making events, he was following the events. He is far too late with economic reform in the country and with a few other things. So I think, I'm sorry for Mr. Gorbachev in that respect, but most of Soviet people, probably former Soviet people, feel relieved. However, I'm quite sure that Mr. Gorbachev will be part of the history. His name will be there, and his name will be there as of a person who really started the whole thing, and who brought the situation to the point when it is democracy, no Soviet Union anymore, whatever, and he deserves all respect in that thing. However, people are very angry now in the Soviet Union. They don't have enough food. They spend 2, 3, 4 hours to buy a loaf of bread. That's why what will be written in the history at this point, they don't care.
When you look back over the history of the Soviet Union, all the way back to Stalin and the early presidents, how does Mr. Gorbachev compare to the last 7 or 8 Soviet presidents?
Oh, Mr. Gorbachev, of course, is very different from any previous Soviet leader. There is no doubt about that. He belongs, first of all, to a younger generation. He's 60 years old, but it is, in Soviet politics, it's younger generation. He, under basically guidance of late Soviet president and former chief of KGB, Mr. Andropov, started very cautiously this openness and perestroika 6 years ago. And then I don't believe that Mr. Gorbachev really planned everything to happen in such a way as we have now in former Soviet Union. But Mr. Gorbachev is a genius politician. He's very, he has very quick reaction, and he was following the events. And I think that what is great is that he didn't stop them. He could stop them. He didn't create them, but on the other hand, he didn't stop them. There was no previously any Soviet leader, who brought, or at least who let democracy to happen in the country. In that respect, Mr. Gorbachev is entirely new breed.
Before we go to the phones, I'll tell you very briefly that Stanislav Levchenko was born in Moscow. He served as a major in the KGB. As an intelligence officer, what was your job? What were your responsibilities?
It was political intelligence and covert action. I was stationed for almost 5 years in Japan, in Tokyo, under cover of the Soviet magazine New Times. And I had to handle agents, recruit new agents among Japanese.
Mm-hmm. And how did you wind up in the United States?
It was a long way for me, but for about 20 years I was really thinking hard about everything which was going on around me in the Soviet Union and the Soviet system of that time. And especially when I got to KGB, I really started to have access to things about which other Soviet people never know. And to make the story short, I did come to the point when I couldn't stand it anymore, the system. It's not just KGB, I mean, the system itself. On the other hand, being a reasonable person, I did not try to become dissident within KGB, because, if I would try, if I just at 1979 when it happened, if I'll just open my mouth, I will never see, freedom in my life. So for me, the only way was to escape, to defect, and which I did, and I published 2 books in Japan. I published a couple of books here. Many times I was on the radio on Russian. So I did, and I'm doing everything I can, not just to let Americans know variety of interesting and sometimes dangerous things about Soviet Union, but Soviet people themselves.
Let's go to the phones. Our first caller is from New Waterford, Ohio. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a comment. I think that the breakup of the Soviet Union is going to cause a great deal of problems. I can't imagine our own country breaking up into multiple different independent states. That was just a comment. And the question I had is, the Soviet Union is an area of rich natural resources, and over those years, those 70 years of Russian dominance, was there any large-scale amounts of gold stockpiled like we have stockpiled? Because Russia, or the old Soviet Union, is now going to ask for help from around the world to help them as they reorganize. And I wondered if there was any large gold reserves.
Thanks.
They definitely do have some gold reserves, and they have quite rich gold deposits, specifically in Autonomous Republic Yakutia, which is northeast of Russia. I cannot, and I don't want to make guesses as to what is the amount of extracted gold which they have in their safes, but I think they have quite some quantity. The problem, however, is with gold and diamonds and other precious metals, is that the more you dump it into the world market, the cheaper it becomes. So it is kind of rather difficult situation for the Soviet Union. That yes, they do have gold, but on the other hand, you know, they to dispose of them the way basically they have to pay all their debts or whatever, you know, they have to then to knock down the price on gold, you know, really dramatically, and South Africa will be unhappy about that too.
Let's go to Chicago, Illinois. While we're doing this, we're going to continue to show you some of the front pages of major newspapers across the country. This is today's USA Today. Chicago, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, and thank you for C-SPAN.
Good evening to you.
And to your guest, I just want, my first question is, have you found anything out about your son and your wife? I've been following you since the Soviet coup. And the second thing is, do you have any information about what's really happening inside the KGB? I know that some reforms are supposed to have been taking place, and I haven't really seen anything lately about that. Do you have any information?
Yes, I have some observations. Thank you for, you know, knowing my life story. I expect my former wife, with whom we are good friends, and my son and his wife to come to this country sometime, probably, hopefully, in March, because former Soviet government did give them, finally, after 12 years, exit visas. Can you repeat the second half of the question?
I'm sorry, she's no longer on the line.
Yes, excuse me. The question was about intelligence, what is going on. That is a very interesting question and an interesting topic. As you know, KGB, as it was before, doesn't exist anymore. It's split in already 2 or 3 different KGBs, plus each former Soviet republic also has some kind of its own KGB. The first chief directorate of KGB, which was intelligence, external intelligence service, became independent organization, which is called now Central Intelligence Service. That actually, the thing which they wanted for years, because they didn't want to be lost in the huge 500,000 at least people strong organization, and they wanted to be kind of to operate on their own or whatever. So I bet they're very glad that they're a separate organization now. And the other thing is that I read a lot of things in newspapers, magazines, and so forth on a reorganization of what was KGB before. There is practically no word about any reorganization of the Soviet intelligence. There is no word of cutting any parts of budget of Soviet intelligence. And we have to assume that Soviet intelligence basically would be operating the same way. It will be Russian intelligence now, plus intelligence of about other 8 or 9 new countries, you know. So situation will not be easy with that, because it's actually for a while can be more complicated than it was.
Everett, Washington, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Levchenko.
Good evening.
As you and I both know, the Marxist ideal was for the withering away of the central state, or the dictatorial powers of the center. I wonder how much you attribute the new Commonwealth to be a result of the realization of the Marxist dream, or the rejection of communism. I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
The main thing is rejection of communism, because whatever Marx, Lenin, or other, as a matter of fact, leaders of the communist world and then of the Soviet Union, if they were really speaking about serious autonomy of other major nationalities in the country, it was all Hippocratic propaganda, but they never meant it. So what happened now, when Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, it is in spite of Marxism-Leninism, and it is really, again, historical show of rejection by 200, almost 80 million people of what was Marxism-Leninism.
Thanks for the call. Toledo, Ohio, what's your question or comment?
Yeah, I have 2.